Then, it made a noise. It let out a sound that to this day haunts me. What I could best compare it to would be this sound. Part 2 of alien abductees of Reddit, or those who have claimed to see a UFO. What's your story? I already know the negative reaction this is going to get, and if you don't believe me, that's fine, because a few years ago I would never have believed me either. For obvious reasons, I can't provide proof. If I could, scientists would be a buzz. Here are the basics of my experience. It happened about 3 years ago in a rural part of Virginia. I don't remember it like a real memory, but more like a dream. That being said, no, I was not asleep. I was driving home from a friend's house when it happened. I can remember vaguely what they looked like and a few other things. When my memory kicks back in, I'm sitting outside the car on the side of the road. I have never told police and I never plan on it. I would just be laughed at or put in the nut house. I have been wanting to do the same for a while, just to get it off my chest. The aliens I remember as looking rather reptilian. They weren't your cliche big heads, grey skin, but they were bipedal. Their craft I don't rightly remember, apart from the inside being very smooth and very bright above me. It is scary to think about, but I do remember a few things they did to me. I wore a mask of some sort and they pulled hairs. There was a minute buzzing I recall, and a thing over the top of my head. There were several of them. When I woke up I was fully clothed beside my car on the same road I was traveling on when I last remembered. I had no scars or puncture marks, so I don't think they injected me or anything. My mom tells a story of her and her friend. Let's call her friend Lisa. When my mom and Lisa were teenagers, they were up on the roof of Lisa's house, and they see a bright light in the sky. Next thing they know, the light is gone. Thing is, they think they've been on the roof for like 15 minutes, but something like 3 hours passed. Mom doesn't remember anything about what happened during that time, and Lisa simply refuses to talk about it. She would answer my mom with things like "I don't know" and just drop it for a long time. So a couple months later, mom moves away and loses contact with Lisa for about 10 years. She finally meets up with her again and immediately notices that something is odd about Lisa. Lisa appeared very distant to her, with a very dreamy demeanor. Like she was really happy and at peace, for no good reason. After they talk for a bit, Lisa brings up the incident on the roof. Mom says she still doesn't really remember anything about it, but Lisa remembers. She remembers everything. She said that at first, it was all in bits and pieces and she couldn't remember any of it clearly. She was confused and scared and wanted to avoid discussing it. Then, as time passed, she began to remember more of it. She remembers it all clearly, and she remembers the other 3 times she was abducted after that clearly as well. At first, they paralyzed her somehow, and did all sorts of invasive experiments on her, but by the most recent time, they stopped probing her, and began to talk with her. They didn't speak English or any other human language, but she could understand everything they said, even though she can't speak their language herself. Apparently they told her all sorts of things, stuff about space, Earth itself, and most shockingly, predicted years beforehand that she would get pregnant in a specific year, and it would also be a stillborn, and that she would never be able to have children again. They also told her that it was not their fault, and they even made an attempt to save her from this fate, but they were unsuccessful. They also told her that they had abducted my mother. Another time, after that first incident, Mom says she has no recollection of any other potential abductions, but she does have recurring nightmares of being abducted, but she's almost sure that they are just that, nightmares. Anyway, Lisa tells Mom that every time she speaks with them, she comes to understand the truth more and more. When Mom inquires what the truth is, Lisa just says that you will know eventually, and she says that once she learned of the truth, then everything became wonderful. Mom has seen her a few more times over the years. We still live in another state from her, and she apparently has a pretty normal life, and doesn't obsess over alien stuff, like some supposed alien abductees do. She only ever brings it up in passing. Not like it's a central part of her daily life. Was traveling back home with my mom from my aunt's house on a warm sunny afternoon. While I was sitting in the passenger seat, an object just appeared in the sky a little to our left. We both saw it immediately. The size of it is what was shocking more than anything. It had the classic saucer shape and was shining brightly because the sun was reflecting off of it. We continued driving down the road a few seconds, just admiring this craft, when all of a sudden we saw something I still don't believe to this day. It just vanishes. Disintegrates. Disappears. Whatever you want to call it. I looked back at my mom and I could tell by her expression she had seen the same thing. Since this sighting, I have always been interested in UFOs and the possibility of other life in our universe. This object in the sky was definitely not a helicopter, airplane, or a flock of geese. My mom and I still talk about the sighting we had, and can't come up with a reasonable explanation as to what we saw that day. This is my UFO story, and it is not a hoax or fabrication. Everyone always laughs at me when I tell this story, but that's fine. I know what I saw. I can't say for sure what happened to me that night, but here is what I know. I was driving home for the weekend from school at Indiana University. It takes me about 2 hours to get home, and I left Bloomington around 10 p.m. At exactly 10:53 I'm on a rural stretch of the 2-lane highway I take home, and I notice what appeared to be flashing lights behind me. I thought, great, I'm getting pulled over, so I turned onto the next country road about a quarter mile from where I noticed the lights. As the car came to a stop and I started to open my glove box to get out my registration and proof of insurance, the lights suddenly disappeared and no car drove past. Now here is where the story takes a turn for the weird, and I'm sure you guys will think I'm just making it all up, because it really does seem like something straight out of a typical UFO movie or story. The electronics in my car started to go haywire. The radio was randomly changing stations, while the volume kept going up and down, while the dome light and headlights start to flicker and turn off and back on. This was at 10:56 p.m. I start thinking to myself that my battery must be failing, or else I have a short somewhere in the electric system of my car. So I lean down to pop the hood so I can take a look at the battery, and that is the last thing I remember doing. The next thing I know, I open my eyes and see nothing but the night sky full of bright stars. It was a cold night, and it seemed like I had never seen stars that bright in my life. I sat up and looked around, and I saw absolutely nothing. Nothing at all. I was in the middle of a field, surrounded by corn stalks left over from the recent harvest. As I started to come to my senses, I started to freak out. Where am I? Why am I asleep in the middle of a field? Where is my car? I got up and started walking toward the distant headlights I could see from a road about half a mile away. When I got to the nearest intersection, I looked at the signs which read 350N and 50W. I was half a mile away from my car, which was just right off the main road. I started walking toward the headlights I could see on the main road. I can't say how long it took me to walk the half mile, but it couldn't have been more than 10 or 15 minutes. When I arrived at my car, all the lights were out. My battery had died, which struck me as odd, because I couldn't have been gone for that long. I looked at my phone, which was sitting on the passenger seat, and the time was 2:17 a.m. Over 3 hours had passed since I turned off onto the side road for the flashing lights behind me. I remember sitting in my car completely dumbfounded, wondering what the hell had just happened to me. After about half an hour of just sitting there, I remembered that my battery was dead, so I got on the phone and called AAA to come out and give me a jump point mirror as the stereotypical encounter story. I probably wouldn't believe them either. It took about an hour for them to get out to me, since I was a good distance away from the nearest town, during which time I just sat in silence, running through the possible scenarios in my head concerning what had just happened. To this day, I couldn't tell you what really happened to me that night. All I know is I can't think of any plausible explanation as to why I woke up over half a mile away from my car in the middle of a cornfield more than 3 hours after I had stopped. Not a very spectacular story, but true. I've always felt some encounter stories were real, but what made me truly believe was one night standing outside watching the stars. It was late, maybe 2 AM, and out in the country, so it was dark, no street lights, very little to no moon. I was watching what I thought was a satellite moving across the sky from right to left. Didn't think twice about it as I saw them all the time. Suddenly, the satellite stopped and shot off fast, totally disappeared, at a 45-degree angle from the direction it came. I have never ever seen a satellite change direction ever. It startled me so much I stood there for a bit wondering if I really saw it or not, but I did, 100% certain. It's unfortunate no one was there with me that night. I walked out of my buddy's place at exactly 4 AM to a bright starry night. When I walked out, something caught my eye to the left of me. I looked over and saw a bright blue, yellow, green, white, red, orange strobing flashing light floating silently to the left. Stood in awe at it and did not want to go grab anyone because I didn't want to miss anything. I watched as it passed in front of the moon behind my friend's place and I saw the outline of the craft. It was a teardrop, sunflower seed type shape, and the craft seemed to have the lights being transmitted from the top half of it. It was almost as if it was transmitting some type of light pattern upward. It also had a dark, thin, smooth line of exhaust that disappeared 50 to 75 feet behind it. This all occurred no less than 400 yards away from me. After it passed the moon, I ran inside and grabbed someone. He saw it, but it was too far away to make out what it was. I went home, which was only a few blocks away, and looked out from the driveway the same direction the first craft had come from. I saw two dim white lights slowly coming over the horizon at a slow pace heading towards me. I then ran inside and grabbed my mother out of bed. We stood there for about 20 minutes while 5 separate crafts flew over us. First came 2, then 1, about 6 to 7 minutes apart from each other, maybe 20 miles per hour, maybe 200 feet up, completely silent. The way that they looked from underneath was each one had 2 huge bright white lights which were maybe 30 to 40 feet across each, but they were so bright it was hard to get a good estimate. They also had a pulsating red one between the white lights that dimmed and relit. I would estimate from the size of the white lights that each craft was maybe between 150 to 200 feet wide. The last craft that flew over us flew over lower and slower than the first 4 had. Then, it made a noise. It let out a sound that to this day haunts me. What I could best compare it to would be this sound. The craft did that twice. These crafts flew directly over us, and I believe that the sound was an acknowledgement. Whatever was piloting it knew we were watching it, kind of like a hello. I immediately started crying. I had no idea what I was looking at or had just heard. Now I don't know if this is real or not, but I remember the shock of the experience really vividly, so I'm inclined to think it happened. Obviously I could be crazy, but whatever throwaway account. When I was younger, I was on my friend's roof deck overlooking the ocean at night. All of my friends were up there with me, and we were all laughing and messing around. I looked out over the dark water and dark sky, and suddenly this enormous invisible thing started moving across the sky. I could tell it was moving, because all the stars and light were getting displaced by its form. It wasn't just a static thing either, it had this motion of flapping. This was before I had seen any movies that used invisibility CG effects, but you know how in Predator they CG him, so that you can slightly see him raised above the background. That's what this looked like. It really freaked me out, because this was at a far distance, and it was still large. The duration was long enough that I could gape at it before it disappeared. I turned to my friends and said, "Oh my god. Guys, did you see that? I'm not sure if it was an alien thing." We now have a Patreon account. Please consider supporting us so that we can keep bringing you this awesome content. Make sure you subscribe and watch our other videos too. Don't forget to turn on notifications to catch our latest videos.